Hello everyone and welcome to this chess strategy video. I had a request from a viewer to do more videos on positional chess. So that's what we'll talk about here today, and especially how you shouldn't relax before the chess game is over. So let's take a look and see what happened here. In this game, I played with the black pieces, so I'll flip the board around. And I played against, this was a game with Game in 25. I played against one of the best chess players at my local chess club. And let's take a look at this here. So the game started out with knight to f3. So as far as chess strategy, this is a flexible move. It doesn't tell the opponent yet exactly what white's plan is, but strategically it develops a piece, it attacks the important central squares, and it can maybe help fortify a d pawn push to d4, but an all-around good flexible move. So I responded with g6. So generally you want to control the center of the board, and you can do that by pushing your pawns forward and trying to attack squares in the center. Or another way to do that is to fianchetto a bishop here, which will fire up the center of the board towards the king side. So that's what I had planned there. So now e4, another good move that helps control the center, maybe blocking this bishop here that's going to be attacking up through the center, and it allows the queen and the bishop room to maneuver. So I continue on developing. My bishop attacks towards the center and towards the king side, and so d3 is played, protecting this unprotected e-pawn. The computer says that's an inaccuracy, that knight to c3 would have been better. So if we take a look at that knight to c3 move, why would this be better? Well, it develops the knight to the c3 square, which is almost always a good spot for the knight to develop to, because it helps really fortify and control the center. And also, by pushing this pawn to d3, as happened in the game, it blocks in your own bishop here. Now, in the game, this bishop planned to go to g2 anyway, so maybe this isn't as big of a deal. But this pawn could have just pushed forward and controlled more space in the center, and given white more room to maneuver. So anyway, moving on, g6 is played, getting ready to fianchetto the other bishop. So now we have g3. So white's plan was to push here to g2, and so this d3 move isn't as big of a deal because the bishop will be up here on g2, although it could be blocked in by its own pawn here on e4. So continuing on, I developed the other bishop, white develops his bishop, and now we have d6. And the computer says that's the best move, but still white is slightly ahead in this position. Because fianchettoing both bishops, it's a little bit slow. But, we both have two pieces developed, and we've each moved 3 pawns. So white does have more space in the center, and he's castled already. So e6 is played next, and the computer says that c5 would have been better. So this move leaves black's position a little cramped. c5 would have kept the game closer to even, and this c5 move would have gained space on the queen side, kept an eye on this important d4 square. So now we have rook to e1, the best move in the position. Just developing a rook behind one of your pawns that has been pushed forward. So that's usually a good strategy, is to just move the rook either to a half open or open file. And if none of those are available, as in this position, then put your rook behind a pawn that's been pushed forward, especially if you plan to push it further at some point even more. And the rook can protect that pawn, and you can use the pawn as a battering ram to press forward into the opponent's position. So knight to e7 is played, and I'm ready to castle here. And now we have a blunder, bishop to g5, which is understandable. You want to develop this bishop and pin the knight to the queen, but it was overlooked that this bishop is firing up through the center towards the queen side and can snatch up a pawn for free here. So instead of bishop to g5, the best move would have been d4, which once again, this is what I talked about. If you're going to push the pawn, d3 fortified this pawn in the center, but if you push both pawns in the center, if your opponent lets you, that gives you more space in the center, and you control a lot of squares. So strategically, it's usually a good idea to get both of these pawns in the center, 2 squares out from their starting position, because you just control a lot of the center here. And it's always important in chess to try and control the center, especially more than your opponent, and stop your opponent from controlling the center more than you are. So moving on, that would have been the best move. But in the game, a blunder was played. And so continuing, I play capture of the pawn on b2, which was the best move. And here, now we see I have the option to capture this rook and on my next move. And I debated whether to do that, whether or not that was too greedy. So we'll take a look and see what happened. So knight is moved to d2, which is the best move. Now the queen protects this rook. And here I debated whether moving back, or just developing another piece, which we'll see that's probably what I should have done, because now I get greedy and I capture. But this gives white time. It gives white the initiative and the time to counterattack. So it looks like the best move, instead of capturing that bishop, would have been just developing another piece. So now the rook would have to move. Well, I guess the rook wouldn't have to move. The queen can just protect it. And so I end up capturing and exchanging off, going ahead in material even more. I'm already ahead by a pawn, but I give up my bishop pair, which strategically, the bishop pair is an advantage that you want to try and keep, and also get rid of your opponent's bishop pair. And we'll see why the bishop pair is such an advantage here in this game. All right, so here it would have been better for me to just develop another piece, and instead I get greedy and let's see, I capture. So now of course the queen recaptures, but now the queen is attacking this rook here, and I follow up one little mistake with another one. So here I moved the rook to g8 because it's under attack. So now I lose the right to castle on the king side, although I don't know if I would want to anyway, because the queen is firing down through here. So if I would have castled, he could have moved here the bishop to a6. We can take a look at that here. So here, if I would have castled, that would not be the greatest move, because now he can just move his bishop to h6 here with the queen. See, the computer says that's a mistake. So, in this position after castling, it looks like, let's see, this is possible, threatening a mate in 1, which can be blocked, but now he can recapture my rook and possibly keep the material even, although it doesn't recommend that. It recommends keeping the bishop pair. So once again, we see the bishop pair is very important. So in the game, we had rook to g8. So I give up my right to castle kingside. I've lost my bishop pair. And here now the computer says white is ahead, even though material-wise I'm +3 ahead. A rook, for my bishop and that extra pawn. But white is still ahead in this position strategically because he has this bishop pair, and I lost my right to castle. My king is stuck in the center. So once again, it would have been better for me to push a pawn here and block the queen from attacking that rook, which I didn't do because I thought, well, he could just start attacking in the center and then that rook would be under attack again. But moving on, now my opponent makes a mistake here, and now black is ahead by 2.7 in this position, and this is a miss by white. So the best move would have been, let's see, instead of queen to f6, knight to c4 would have been better. So if we go back and look at that, let's see here, knight to c4. So just jumping up here, this would keep the game in favor of white here by half a pawn's worth of material, even though, once again, material-wise, white is ahead by +3. So if we take a look at this, knight to c4, what does that do? Well, it gets this knight out closer towards the center, maybe threatening to push this pawn forward and try and attack in the center. So another strategy, if your opponent's king is stuck in the center of the board, a lot of times it can be a good idea to try and bust that center open, especially if your king is safely castled. All right, so if we go back and look here, queen to f6 is played. Now white is ahead, or excuse me, black is ahead quite a bit after white's move here. But I return the favor and I make a mistake or a miss here. Knight to d7 attacking the queen. But the better move would have been e5. So taking space in the center. So that's a good strategy to try and take as much or more space than your opponent. So this would kind of even things out in the center. Now we notice the queen is trapped here with nowhere to go. So the next move would be knight to d7, and the queen would be trapped here. So white would pretty much be forced to play this move, and then now it recommends just moving the knight away and just trading off the queen here. So the game would have to continue with capture, or white could capture and the bishop would recapture, but now the knight can recapture here. So anyway, this is what black recommends. So now this kind of lightens the attack that white had going here. So if you're under a lot of pressure and your opponent is attacking you, another good strategy is to try and trade off some of the attackers, trade off some pieces, and with less pieces to attack with, your opponent will have less of a chance of breaking through your defenses. Okay, so if we go back and look at what happened in the game, queen to f6 was played. I missed, I could have trapped the queen in here and forced a trade, but instead I attack with the knight. I thought, well, I'll develop and attack at the same time, but this gives the queen room to retreat, and the queen goes to f4, although the computer preferred a retreat back here to c2, where maybe the queen can keep an eye on things on the queen side and maybe reposition, start pushing a pawn to counterattack over here, since the king could still castle here. All right, so now finally I play this e5 move, and now it says it's the best move, and the queen is under attack again. So the queen is forced to move and goes to the best square, creating a battery, and forcing white to keep the queen here to help protect this knight with the king. But now we have another mistake here. So I played h5, because this pawn was under attack. But it looks like the best move would have been just f6, attacking the bishop. So if we take a look at that, f6, the bishop would be attacked. And now the best response is for white to capture here, it looks like. And so then that would allow my knight to recapture and get rid of his bishop pair. So another strategy is, especially if you don't have the bishop pair, but even if you do, always look for ways to get rid of your opponent's bishop pair. Now, why is that a good strategy? Well, as we see here, my opponent has the bishop pair, so he is controlling a lot of dark squares and light squares, where I'm only controlling the light squares with my bishop. So that extra bishop gives the attacker an advantage because they have a piece that can cover these dark squares that I don't have anymore. My knight can try and compensate, but of course knights jump back and forth and covering different color complexes. So without my bishop to counter this dark squared bishop of white's, he has that advantage by controlling more of these dark squares. All right, so moving on, let's wrap this game review up. So back here, queen to h4 because the pawn attacked the queen. So I play this move, which was not the best move, but it is still showing black is ahead here by 1.14. So now the bishop moves over here, which is an inaccuracy. Knight to c4, just developing the knight up towards the center of the board was preferred by the computer. So then I return the favor with a mistake here. I thought, well, I can try and move this knight and trade off the bishops. But instead, what would have been better? Knight to f8 would have been a better move, which allows the knight the opportunity to jump here to h7 and attack this bishop and try and drive it away, so the knight is not pinned to the queen, and maybe relieve this pressure that has built up with the bishop pair and the queen and bishop battery just attacking here. All right, so if we look at what happened in the game, after bishop to c8, a mistake, my opponent responds with a great move here, pushing forward in the center, trying to break open the center, which is usually a good strategy when your opponent's king is stuck in the center here. So I respond with this move, which was best, to fortify this pawn in the center and to attack at the same time. But now my opponent captures, which is best. I recapture with the queen, which was the preferred move, because now the queen won't be pinned to the knight. So capture of the pawn, which is best. So I give back some material, and now the game is about even. Maybe black is slightly ahead. Material-wise, white is still ahead +2 because of the bishop for the extra rook here. But now the bishop pair is gone. So continuing on, I make a blunder here. So, in this position, I thought, well, I'm ahead, and, ahead in material, that I should be okay, and I relaxed and just made a blunder, lack of concentration. So I thought, well, if I move up here and, there's a capture, or excuse me, I thought I could capture the queen and trade off queens, but I overlooked that, he can just capture here, which is the best move. So now he's ahead material. And then at this point, I was running lower on time, and so trying to rush and, trading off queens, I guess, was still the best move to alleviate the attack. And it pulls this knight, the bishop has to retreat back. So here I still have an opportunity, maybe to try and trap this bishop, but I grabbed this pawn, which was best. Now, if the knight captures here, well, then I can push forward and trap the bishop. So my opponent, who's a good player, of course, saw that and moves the bishop up so it can't be trapped. And that gives me time to protect my pawn with the best move here. And so continuing on, and now if we look at the material, it's even. But after this move, which is a mistake, the game is still +1 in white's favor. So it looks like pushing this pawn immediately is the best move, opening up the center here with the king stuck in the middle. So if we look at that, e5, and then the game may have continued with the king moving out and protecting this pawn, but then now more pressure is added, the pawn would capture, then we have this fork here. So I don't know, I wonder if there's something better. The computer recommended that line, but if we look at it again, e5, moving out of there, then the knight piles up. Not sure what could be done there, because that knight is going to jump in there. So if we go back one more time, I don't know. It's just, in this position, black is in so much trouble because I didn't castle early enough to get out of the center. And strategy-wise, if your opponent's king is in the center, you want to break open the center and aim towards that king. So black is already in trouble here, but it could have been a lot worse. All right, finishing this up, knight to c4 was played, threatening to capture this pawn and check the king. So I move up here. The computer says this is a great move, just protecting the pawn. Then pushing forward here. Although now it prefers a4 as the best move. Although these moves are both pretty close. in the evaluation that's given by the computer. So pushing forward here, this is a mistake. So another strategical error, whenever there is a pawn pressing up the board, and threatening to become a passed pawn, that can be quite dangerous. So I should have knocked that pawn out instead of giving my opponent the passed pawn. So here, instead of attacking the knight, it would have been better to just capture this pawn. So after capture, the game may have continued with a recapture. Now both the knights are up here harassing me. I would have to move, and then, rook to c1 here. I guess the computer wants to push this pawn forward, get rid of this isolated pawn, and break apart my pawns. So in the game, d5 was played, a mistake here. So pushing forward, which is a good move, although the computer preferred, knight to d6, jumping that knight further up into my territory. But pushing your passed pawn towards promotion is usually a great idea, especially if you have enough material to keep it protected as you push it forward. So I move away, and that's not the best move. It looks like king to c6 would have been better, which is interesting. I was worried about the other knight jumping up in here and checking me. So moving on, now the bishop jumps over here and checks me anyway, which is the best move, and now white is plus 3.9 ahead. So the final few moves before I ran out of time in the game, check. The king is running here, but now the pawn is threatening to promote. I move the bishop up to cover this square, but now the bishop is under attack. So I move here to blockade the pawn, but my opponent jumps in here, and let's see, if we go back, it looks like instead of moving here, the best move would have been just to retreat up here. And now we have the knight jumping in, although bishop to d2 would have been better, which would even further trap my king in here, where it would have nowhere to go. But the knight jumps forward, and at this point, white is winning, plus 3.5. I was running out of time and had no more notation written down for this game. I think in my hurry, to not run out of time, before I did run out of time, I think I may have ended up trading off one of these knights and then putting my rook in front of the pawn, but then the knight repositioned, attacking my rook. And I had to give up a rook, so then I was down even more material until I ran out of time and lost. So, if we look at what the computer says, how the game could have continued, well, king to a5, knight repositioning over here. All right, so this is how the computer says the game could have gone. But by then, now black is, white is ahead plus 8. So what did we learn in this game? Well, when you're ahead material-wise, do not relax, because the game is not over. So don't relax until it's completely over. The importance of the bishop pair strategically. So if we go back to the beginning of the game, let's see here. So when I had the opportunity to capture that rook, the computer recommended that I not do that. keep my bishop pair, just take my one pawn advantage, and instead develop a knight here. So it recommended not capturing, developing the knight. So bishop pair, very important. Unless the position is really blocked up, then your bishop pair may be limited and the knights may be stronger at that time. But even then, if the game opens up and you have that bishop pair, you'll have an advantage again, especially if your opponent does not have the bishop pair. And remember, if your opponent has the bishop pair and you do not, try and exchange off one of their bishops to limit their scope, because the bishop pair gives an advantage to the attacker because they cover a lot of extra squares with that extra bishop that they have, especially if you do not have one of your bishops. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll try and do more chess videos covering chess strategy and positional chess because especially one of the viewers requested that. But a lot can be learned by looking at different strategies. So please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Leave any comments or suggestions or requests on what you would like to see in future videos. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.